you listen to the whole interview with Paxman back in 2011, almost everything he said has been borne out by events. Should we have listened more to what he said about the scandal and been less dismissive, as I've been certainly guilty of him just as a person?
I think there's something to be said about it. I think, in short, that Tommy has shed light on it. And there's no doubt about that. But I think it's interesting to look at what him and Jordan Peterson aren't interested in shedding light on. They're only interested in sexual violence when it comes to Muslims against non-Muslims. But they're quite happy to stand on a stage next to Russell Brand and the like. There's no, it's very much criticize them, but not the other. Who's on my team? Who plays into my anti-immigration rhetoric? I think that tells us a lot about what they really
Russell
care
Brand
about.
has been accused of things, but he hasn't been convicted of any crimes.
Well, Elon Musk was pictured with Ghislaine Maxwell. That's a photo that's very easy to find.
Me too.
I was pictured with Ghislaine Maxwell. I met her for 5 minutes at a book launch in 2012 or something, and that picture gets sent to me 20 times a day as evidence that I was part of Epstein's Island gang. I've never met him, met her for 5 minutes. There's a picture of me and her at a book launch where everyone else got cut out. So these things when you're a public figure of any kind, and obviously Musk is right up there, you're going to meet loads of people and get pictured with them. Doesn't mean you're party or anything they're doing.
Can I add on to the back of what you had to say just then about so what Jordan Peterson was talking about there, he was talking a lot about, the Muslim faith, and he was talking about how this is an Islam versus Christianity debate. I mean, in the UK...
Is he right about that?
Well,
should we have a grown-up debate about the impact of so many people coming in?
Islam against Christianity? Are we going backwards to the fucking Crusades or what? Piers, you're going backward, Piers. You're fucking your shit up here.
A different view of perhaps democracy and those things.
Well, what I was going to argue was today the Archbishop of Canterbury steps down. And he's stepping down because he failed to report
abuse in the church.
Yes,
Catholics are banging those
I'm
kids.
a Catholic.
Wish I'd made that point to Jordan.
Well, I'm a Catholic, and I have to say the Vatican is not clear of this crime in any sense of the word. The Vatican is plagued by this crime. Those are white Christian or Catholic people.
Yes.
I don't quite. I think it's so unhelpful for us to say that child grooming is exclusive.
But also that story in France is very relevant because they were not all Muslim men doing it from a cultural, religious point of view. I mean, the terrifying thing about that story was just the randomness of who these guys were. Yeah. They were highly paid professionals. They were local farmers. They were young, old,
plumbers,
black, white. I mean, they were everything and anything, right? And they were all joined in this horrendous thing.
Brotherhood of sexual sadism. I think the most potent point that Jordan made was kind of condensing sort of human nature in the sense that a single woman, like a woman just being there by herself, is primarily viewed in nature as a target for rape. And she kind of almost speaks to the most evil and base male human instincts. And I think that's cross-cultural, that transcends religion or anything like that. I think the reason why this is such a tricky debate is because religions don't exist in and of themselves uniquely. Like religions also develop alongside cultures, for example. So the reason why, again, you see no representation of Bangladeshi British people in these rape scandals, but you see it's almost predominantly Pakistani men. And I use the word Pakistani and Bangladeshi instead of Muslim because they're both basically Muslim. Right? It's because of the culture, and it's like.
But that's why I don't like the generalized talk about Muslims.
You just been doing it for a whole hour. You've been generalizing you and that fucking scumbag Jordan Peterson. He even said, well, they're not even democracies. Democracy, they're 40 years. Who the fuck gives about democracy, man? What does it have to do with rape? What does it matter? 734,000 women in America were raped or attempted rape in 2018. That's 5 years ago. So do we blame that on Christian value, or democratic values, or liberal values, or secular value? Who do we blame that on? You can't blame it on. You got to blame it on these people who are just criminals. It's very simple. If you're a criminal, you're a criminal. We should not attach your religion or your faith to your crime. Most serial killers are white. I'm sure they're Christians. Is that Christian fundamentalism that has to do with these white serial killers? Does that make any sense to you? This whole show today with Piers Morgan has nothing to do with the rape. They don't even care about those girls. The whole idea is to stigmatize Islam, to attach it to this rapist, Pakistani guys or gangs, whatever the fuck they are, and I really put them in jail. Some of them, put them all in jail. That's it. You have a legal system. Britain is not some fucking backward country. Most of the world's common laws come from Britain.
Robinson says after 7/7, this is my message: all Muslims are complicit. Well, that's an Islam.
But there are countries. There are countries with Muslims that have different cultures to other countries with different Muslims. I mean, the Muslims I grew up in West Africa, for example, are fundamentally different.
I can tell you, I've traveled to many Muslim countries. There's a lot of good in Muslim countries, and there's some bad, as there is in a lot of our Western European
Hindu,
countries,
all over the world.
You know, and when I hear them talk about us, trust me, it's not a compliment.
Well, I mean, don't the Qataris mock us for like putting our parents in care homes when
all
we care more about our dogs than our families?
They mock us for pretty much all of it. Let me bring in Natalie, who's been waiting very patiently over in.
This is our Jewish friend. She's going to come here. She's going to become a Muslim scholar, a scholar on Islam, and she's going to call Muslim pedophiles. She's going to go even worse than these guys. And the problem I have with her when she says that, I already sold her segment, a little bit of it. Piers Morgan does not correct her or hold her.
In Washington. Natalie, a lot of Americans seem to have a very simplistic view, which is British multiculturalism is to blame. That's why this has happened. I would argue, having lived here all my life, on and off, that multiculturalism has been very successful largely in the UK. We're known as a very tolerant and multicultural country with actually not many problems like this. This is a scandal involving a group of people from a very particular demographic of Muslims, specifically British Pakistani Muslims. And in the same way that separately we had a scandal of extremists attaching themselves to ISIS and committing acts of terror for a few years, and that got resolved, this has been dealt with not adequately, but will now, I'm sure, be dealt with adequately. Why should we blame multiculturalism in totality for this?
Here we go, watch.
Sure, well, I don't really think that tolerance should be the paramount virtue if the disparate cultures that you're importing into said country are cultures that, frankly, I think are conducive to gang.
Those cultures have been there for 100 years. The Pakistanis did not just jump right into it. They were former colonial countries who were part of the British Empire, where the British were raping probably Indian and Pakistani women for centuries, who happen to be second, third, and fourth generation. As a matter of fact, these Pakistanis should be attached to Western values because they were born in Britain, raised in Britain, and with British values.
Raping of young girls. If you read the Quran, I mean, young women, pedophilia isn't something that's totally out of the blue.
Quran is, see, this is the problem. When you have some fucking hoe come on fucking your show and starts to despise your whole faith about pedophilia, and we don't have nothing in the Quran about pedophilia. If I read the Bible, God used to take a third of the virgins. Remember? In the Old Testament. The New Testament was a little bit clean, but the Old Testament was all rape, even God got shares of the virgins.
It's codified in that text. And I think why it resonates so strongly in America, and I know your analysis of it was maybe a little bit reductive, but it's because that's the lived experience of a lot of Americans when it comes to the issue of immigration. And I think the hypocrisy where you see elites pushing multiculturalism, pushing open borders, mass migration, when they've never really made the case as to why the average American benefits from it or needs to have it. They just say diversity is our strength, and that's where they end the sentence. And I think to that point, right, when you read the limited inquiries that they've had into the whole grooming gang escapades, what do they always say? Oh, well, the police didn't go into it because they didn't want to start race riots or race wars. I'm sorry. These are the same elites who have absolutely no qualms or no issue with bringing up, racialized incidents if it's a white person being the aggressor against a minority, just like what happened in the case of George Floyd. Yeah. So it's very selective, and I think it confirms what a lot of people think here, certainly in the United States with the agenda agenda of certainly mass illegal, and I think we've also learned this week, legal immigration, that there is some level of replacement, I think, of American culture going on here. And they do it by importing cultures that have nothing in common with the West. And our leaders will say that assimilation is racist, it's neo-colonial, it's not appropriate to say that cultures that have different values and standards than us need to adopt the shared cultures of the country that they're immigrating to. So that is not a approach to immigration that works.
Okay, but isn't it undeniably true that I think the vast majority of domestic terrorism in the United States this century has been perpetrated by white people?
Yeah, that's what the FBI said.
Well, that's only because they've reworked the definition of domestic terrorism to
include
events like January 6th and people who are affiliated with MAGA. So I would certainly say that their classification of what constitutes domestic terrorism is sort of cherry-picked, especially when they prosecuted or persecuted every single Jan 6er on an individual basis. But I mean, the Biden regime just 3 weeks ago puts out a whole white paper, a new strategy to counter Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. I don't really think that that's the most pressing issue going on in the United States of America right now. And I think there's two compounding issues, which is what Dr. Jordan Peterson was getting into. One is the issue of mass migration at an unprecedented number in terms of the people who are coming in. Traditionally, America would sort of have on and off periods. Now you're seeing numbers of migrants that are just completely overwhelming what it used to be. And there's no off periods. And you have a sort of societal superstructure and culture where you look down on assimilation. And if you tell people who come from different cultures, and oftentimes it's racial.
700,000 women were raped in the United States by American citizens. Now, the whole issue has nothing, I agree, we should not have any open borders, all that, but don't blame this shit on other people. If 734,000 women were raped in 1918, what the fuck am I saying 1918? In 2018, that means what are we going to do with our citizens? So let's be factual. Now, the whole conversation was about Muslim, Pakistanis, now has turned to Mexicans. I don't know where we're going to go in the end, by the end of the show going.
Or there's a religious component to it, if they're not white or if they're Muslim or whatever they may be, that if you demand assimilation, you're smeared and mocked as a racist. And it doesn't work, because these cultures, as evidence in what's going on all around United Kingdom, and there's similar stuff going on here. We have no-go zones in the United States too. It doesn't work. And Piers, frankly, I don't think you're correct to say that multiculturalism has been successful. I think if you told the girls who were victims of violent, atrocious rapes, I don't think that they would agree that multiculturalism has been wonderful.